Hi everyone, my name is Avner Yeshurun. I'm from Miami, Florida, and I was asked by the Sephardi Chabura to provide some insight into this week's Torah portion of Yitro. And naturally I began where we must all begin, with the verses of this week's Torah portion. And as I was reading through the text, I began to notice a interesting pattern of communication occurring between the various parties and elements involved in this week's Parasha. Be it between Yitro and Moses, between Moses and God, between God and the Israelite nation. There's just an immense amount of communication. And the way that I noticed this was due to the fact of a high frequency of some form of the word lishmoa occurring in the text here. The first verse of this week's Torah portion is Vayishma Yitro, and numerous other examples throughout the Parsha. Ata shema bekoli, Vayishma Moshe, ve'ata im shamoa tishma'u, ba'avur yishma ha'am. And again in Deuteronomy and Parashat Vayetchanan, where the Ten Commandments are repeated again, they are in close proximity to the verse Shema Yisrael. And I'm not the only individual to have noticed this. Indeed, Rabbeinu Bechaye, in his introductory statement to Parashat Yitro, notes the fact that the very trait which sets a human being apart from all other creatures is the fact that he is able to communicate and he's able to speak. And it's a force which can be extremely destructive or constructive depending on how it's used and in what context and for what purpose. The question becomes, what are we able to learn from the juxtaposition of these two themes, the revelation at Sinai, Matan Torah, and the fact that it's placed in a context of communicating? I believe that we must back up and zoom out a little bit on history in order to appreciate the context of Har Sinai and what it meant for the Jewish people, for the Israelite nation as a people, as a nation. Shortly before the sublime experience of the divine at Sinai, the Israelites were a nation of slaves to the Pharaoh in Egypt, and they break free from the house of bondage. This was a physical breaking free and a spiritual breaking free and an intellectual breaking free. On all fronts, they broke free. And they begin a journey to the land of Canaan through the desert. Now, whether the journey was supposed to last 1 year or 40 years, as later developments will determine, is irrelevant to the fact that the journey through the desert was a formative and definitive experience in the life of the Israelite Jewish people, as they were to be called later on. They went from being a collection of slaves to coagulating into a people and into a nation, where they acquired goals and where they acquired law and where they began to see a purpose, a common purpose to define themselves by, as opposed to simply escaping from enslavement, from bondage. And the climax of this entire experience, arguably, is in Yitro, in Parashat Yitro, where the Israelites experience a revelation with the divine. And in fact, they were united under the banner Ke'ish Echad Belev Echad, as the Chachamim say. They were like one man with one heart in this unifying experience of the divine, in which they were imparted the very foundation, the doctrine of their society, in which they would build on using later. And the question becomes, what does communication have to do with doctrine? What are the two themes of communication and doctrine, discussion and doctrine? The verses seem to place an emphasis on communication when imparting a doctrinal experience to the reader. And I believe that it's a profound insight into what it takes for a society to not only function, but to thrive. Various examples throughout history are apparent of those societies which discard one and choose the other. whether it be choosing doctrine over discussion or discussion over doctrine. Neither of those result in productive, healthy societies which perpetuate themselves and which are appealing and which, are fulfilling for those who are a part of it. The only element of the Israelite nation which seems to be able to survive all of its experiences and continue for so many thousands of years is that which decides to balance discussion and doctrine on a scale and allow for both of them. So while we have the Ten Commandments, which dictate objective, non-arguable morals that a society must live by, such as respecting others' property and respecting respecting family, and balancing work and life, and balancing spirituality with physicality, we also see room for discussion, where we do not suppress the difficult questions that life throws at us, and we just simply throw our sins on a doctrine. We instead engage in discussions and engage in contemplations and engage in theorizing. An incredible example of this is our very own Chabura. Anyone who's active on the chat or who reads the messages on the chat will clearly see the balance of doctrine and discussion. And this allows someone to have a framework in order to define their contemplations through. And this allows someone to feel liberated and not suppressed. So I believe this is the message for why an emphasis is placed on communication, contextualizing doctrine, and that they are both a inseparable elements to a healthy society. So I wish everybody a wonderful Shabbat Parasha Yitro, in which they will engage in lively discussions and will explore our doctrine, which is so beautiful. Thank you.